Debate. Want to talk a little bit about the concept of debate. Now, with this subject, I'm going to be sticking specifically to debate in the context of political and social issues. So I'm not talking so much about debate, for example, in a relationship context, or more trivial things like, oh, what film should we watch tonight, or what you want to have for dinner. I'm talking about debate about the sort of things that people tend to have strong views about in terms of political discourse. That could be social issues, it could be international issues as well. Some of the most heated debates I've seen have been about foreign policy and about different views that people have on contentious issues in relation to foreign policy. Um, so I don't really want to address any specific issue here, but that is the umbrella I'm looking at: political and social issues. There are some things about the idea of debate that I think, we hear debates all the time. We hear debates on the news, we hear debates on social media, and if, like me, you follow these things, you've probably been in many debates yourself. But debates have different contexts, so it could be a debate between two citizens who aren't, they're not public figures, and that happens all the time. You see it on the internet. I've engaged in countless back and forth exchanges with people, most of the time civil, but sometimes, yeah, it did get a bit heated. I won't lie about that. Over the last 10 years, I've been extremely active on social media, and I've literally lost count of the number of exchanges that I've been in. Not that it's always debates. Very often I'm agreeing with people or they're agreeing with me. So it's not always necessarily a confrontational situation, but it is more often than not. Um, when we think about debate, everyone thinks about what is right and what is wrong. But what we don't look at is what what promotes or what provokes people to have debate in the first place. Is it because people have strong views on a subject and they want their opinion heard, or they feel that the other person is being ignorant and they just want to enlighten them? I came across reference to, it wasn't an article as such, but it was reference to an American psychologist who was saying that partisan politics, particularly in a relationship context, or including the medium of social media, the social media aspect has really changed everything because people could say things online that they wouldn't necessarily say in the real world. And I would ask all my subscribers, hand on heart, do you communicate online exactly the way that you would communicate in the real world? Maybe you do, but I suspect if people are being brutally honest, many people don't do that. I mean, I'd be lying if I said the way I communicate online is exactly the way I communicate in the real world. I don't want the gulf to be too big because that would feel insincere. But I'm not going to lie, it is not exactly the same. Um, I think it's important to take opportunities to have face to face debates in the real world. I think that is important, especially if you're someone who wants to get involved in political discourse. But what people don't talk about is such things as, okay, what's your motivation? Are you trying to get the other person to see your point of view? Or if it's not that, do you simply want to challenge them? Maybe you think, to put it bluntly, they're full of BS and you want to kind of challenge them. And you don't really care if they agree or don't agree. You don't really care if they come around to your way of thinking, but you just want to confront them, basically, because they're coming out with a position that you find intolerable. I've been there, and I know it's been directed at me as well, where people think, in fact, that was the case recently. I've made some controversial videos on this channel, and it's attracted the ire of certain people. Um, I'm going to be making a video more specific about my direction with this channel, but I'm not just talking about this channel. I'm talking about a general thing, okay? Um, so here's something. Nobody wants to be humiliated. Nobody wants to have this situation in a debate where the other person just outsmarts them, or not necessarily outsmarts them, but is a better debater. I don't like the idea of winning and losing debates. Obviously, in a political context, when people are running for high office, winning a debate matters because it's part of the process. But in terms of if you're wanting to, I guess what it really comes down to is what is your objective? If your objective is to have a frank exchange of views, then the object shouldn't be about winning the debate. I think there's too much, and I think the media is partly to blame for this. You know, you see it all over the internet, like person A owns person B, person A exposes person B. It's just so populist. And I guess what I'm saying is a little bit of the adult side of this has been taken away, where it's almost boring or not the popular thing to do just have a frank exchange of views. It's all about, oh, how can we humiliate the other person? How can we make them look like shit? You know? An ego comes into it. Absolutely comes into it. Some people are better at hiding that, but I think in a debate context, no one wants to be, humiliated. No one wants that feeling. And that's an aspect of debate, of polemics, that no one really looks at or considers, at least not openly. And polemics, of course, is slightly different because that's more aimed at critique, purely critique, rather than having an exchange of views. I'm not against polemics, I think they have their place. If you feel something is unjust, then you're not going to necessarily, I think it's unrealistic to be overly polite. You see, to me, having a frank exchange of views and having a candid debate isn't necessarily about super politeness. I don't want a debate to be too sanitized because if I have strong views, for example, on a subject like human rights, and I'm debating someone who is for trampling said human rights, I'm not going to be overly polite to them. However, I would also recognize that if I just come in like a bull and say, oh, you're X, Y, and Z, they're just going to either retreat or they're going to get on the defensive. So if your objective with debate, and I'm kind of telling myself this as well, is in any way to get the other person to see light, you need to have some respect for them. You know, if you're just going to pontificate and talk down to someone, um, maybe that's your objective. But if your objective is to get them to sort of see a different way, to see things a different way, they're never going to do that if you're just insulting people, even if you think the insults are justified. It's just human nature. If someone is attacked, they'll get on the defensive in most cases. Um, so I think really it depends on the context. Then there's of course scenarios like two people are debating in front of a studio audience. I'm quite critical of studio audiences. We've seen them a lot in British politics of late and in American politics, although there's a longer history in American politics with political debates. But I find the studio audience a bit of a distraction because often they're partisan, often they'll heckle and they'll cheer their chosen candidate, and it doesn't give the person watching on the TV really a perspective of it. Kind of, it's a distraction. I mean, this is something when I was watching the Democratic debates, a lot of people were saying, "Can we lose the studio audience?" Because it was just like a popularity contest rather than a serious political contest. And I'm not saying there weren't some good ideas put forward, but it got distracted by that dynamic. And here in the UK, there's this thing of late where they'll ask a person, a member of the public, to ask candidates a particular question, and then they kind of branch out from that. I understand the purpose of that, but I've mixed views on whether that's the best way to go about things. I also think, in this country, when you get a studio audience, they need to know that they're kind of in a fortunate position, because if you're getting to ask someone who could be prime minister of this country a question, it's your democratic right, but you're in a position that most people aren't in. Most people won't get to directly ask a potential prime minister a question like that. We're not an authoritarian state. Politicians are subject to scrutiny, but I think that um, people who have that opportunity need to make the most of it, and recognize that they're in that position. What else can be said? Yeah, so we talk about what's your objective with debate, and no one wants to be humiliated, and the tone of debate. There's another side that isn't, I think, often considered, and that is at some point the debate has to end. This is one reason why I don't get into lengthy back and forths on my comment section, because I don't really see the point. I say what I need to say in the video, and people can agree or disagree, but if I reply to a comment, then I'll need to reply to the reply and then reply to that reply. And I don't want to get into a running thread with comments. My subscribers are welcome to do that, and I'll try to respond where I can. But I'm not going to get into running debates with people. I just won't do that, because that's not the purpose I intend with this channel. Um, in a situation, if I was debating someone face to face, that would be different. But even then, you need to have a cut-off point. At some point, you have to agree to disagree or walk away, or say, I mean, this is why, for example, in an organized debate, it needs to be properly organized. It can't just become a shouting match. Otherwise, no one can hear what's being said. That's why a good moderator is very important. Um, Combining alcohol and politics is never a good idea. I've been there a few times. All that happens is people lose their inhibitions. They get too confident. If you lack confidence, then the alcohol thing can actually give you too much confidence, and nothing's achieved. It just becomes a shouting match, and that really isn't good. Avoid alcohol in politics. Avoid any sort of drug in politics for that matter. But, at some point, you're going to say what you're going to say. You're going to maybe listen to the other person. You might agree to meet them halfway, but at some point, you have to say, okay, well, we've talked this out. That's it. Let's have a rest now. You can only debate for so long. You can't. I've seen people literally on a thread go back and forth for hours and hours and hours online, or without end. And I really don't see the point of that. It's almost like a jousting contest, or it's almost like those old boxing matches at the beginning of the 20th century. And in the 45th round, and it sort of makes you think, like Jess Willard, Jack Johnson, Jack Dempsey fights of the past, George Carpenter.